I am so excited and so honored to have Paul Young with us today. And one of the reasons Paul Young is the author of The Shack, and The Shack is a book that greatly affected my life many years ago. And I know it has affected the lives of people all around the world. And when I
Who'd have
started
thought?
teaching,
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's amazing. I
It's
hear
totally
about it
amazing.
still all the time.
I know, me too. And it blows me away as much today as it ever has. I wrote it for our 6 kids and made 15 copies at Office Depot that did everything I ever wanted that book to do. So all of this is just like, who'd have
Yeah.
thought?
Lots
I'm
of
grateful to be
icing
a part of
on
it.
a great
Yep.
big cake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Truly.
I 2 years ago I started teaching GED prep courses in the prison community. And it's
Hmm.
something that I kind of fell into, not really knowing much about the incarcerated culture. And in the past 2 years, I have learned so much from these students. And I
Sure.
think they are some of the bravest, most courageous people that I've ever met.
Hmm.
And
Me too.
when I wanted to I wanted to show a movie, and I thought of yours because the themes that weave through this story are the themes that almost everyone in the prison system deals with, the themes of abuse, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, the
Yep.
themes of trauma, the themes of forgiveness and unforgiveness, and forgiving your perpetrators, forgiving God, and forgiving yourself. And
Yeah.
so when I showed it, it was just like unbelievable, the response that I got. And they longed to connect to you and ask you questions, and they had lots of questions. And so I thought
Sweet.
this would be a lovely way, since the COVID mess is here, that we can connect you to them. So thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Everybody's incarcerated this
Yeah,
last
that's
year.
right. Exactly.
Uh,
Thanks
so
for
it's
sharing the
about
space.
how do we find a place within us that is not a prison, right?
Yes.
And this is I'm around the prison culture a fair bit. I've got really good friends both in places like Coffee Creek, which is in Oregon, which is a women's prison,
Mm-hmm.
and Death Row in Tennessee and Nashville, where I've got a number of friends. In fact, just got a letter from Death Row sitting on my
Wow.
desk. I haven't even read it yet, and I was having this conversation with Terry, who wrote me, and he and I become really good friends. And he said, I told him, I said, at least there's a simplicity to your life. You know what the boundaries are. You've got the walls and the concrete. He's been on death row for 37 years now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I said, you're some of the freest people I've ever met. It's it's so many people out there are walking around in a prison and they don't know the walls. They can't see it, and so they're trying to figure out why their home feels like a prison, and
Yeah.
and and it's just like that's what happens when you make your prison and you redecorate it so that you can put home on there. Then it becomes a hard place to leave,
So true.
for one thing.
Mhm.
And yet I know people who are in the prison system who are free in
Me
ways that
too.
people outside of it are not. Yep.
And
Yep.
thrive.
Very much so. Because if this doesn't work for children and first century slaves and people on death row, then we're talking some mythology, or some imagination or illusion
Right.
or
Right.
deception. So yeah, I'm with you about that.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to start by reading a journal entry from one of my students who responded to the shack. I had them write essays, I had them write journal
Wow.
entries. We talked about it quite a lot. And this
Yeah, holy
particular
ground.
one touched me deeply. So I wanted to start there. This movie really opened my eyes that it's okay to question God. It's okay to be angry with God. At the same time, we have to realize God doesn't do bad things. I also saw that forgiveness was a big theme. And personally, that is something I've really struggled with. The need to forgive. Mac struggled with the need to forgive his father for the things he did. And I need to forgive my mother for the abuse and suicide. Now I see that if he can forgive the man that killed his kid or his dad, then I can forgive my mom. God's the answer. This movie really gave me hope.
Yeah, I mean, so many of us have so many really important questions. Kind of like, so I went through all this trauma and brokenness. Where the hell were you?
Right.
It's like, why didn't you stop it? Right? Which is a really profound question and an important one.
And probably the one that was asked the most.
I'm sure. I'm sure, because it's my question.
Sure.
When I come from I come from a sexual abuse background. I had a dad who beat the crap out of me, and he was a missionary preacher. I grew up in the highlands of New Guinea, a different culture, a different world. And I'm a third culture kid, and which is very similar in some respects to a person who's been incarcerated, because a third culture kid means that you have your passport culture, right? And there were 4 kids in our family. I had a Canadian passport. I was a year old when we went into the highlands of New Guinea. My sister had a Dutch passport because New Guinea was under Dutch control when she was born. My brother Tim had a kind of a vague UN passport because the Dutch vacated and the UN came in, and the only time in history took over a piece of property because nobody knew what to do with it. And then when my youngest brother was born, Stephen, he had an Indonesian passport.
Wow.
Right. 4 kids with 4 national passports, which made border crossings really interesting.
That's a lot of identity right there.
Yeah, exactly. So a third culture kid has a passport culture. I was born in Canada, right? Then the issue is we grow up in a different culture, and we think we belong there. And then you're pulled back into your passport culture and you don't belong there. But by the time you get back to the culture you grew up in, you don't belong there either. And so you're part of a third culture, something that doesn't belong anywhere.
Right.
And so I know a lot of people who are incarcerated, they have their passport culture that is outside of these walls.
Right.
But then they've developed an entire cultural existence inside, and they create an identity in order to survive.
You have to.
You do. And by the time you get to the outside world, you kind of don't belong there either.
Right.
But you don't belong inside either, so very similar, similar. And it's a profound question to say, if God is good, why didn't he stop it? For me, sexual abuse started right around when I was 5. And both in the tribal culture, which I loved, I identified with that as my family.
Right.
And then I was sent away to boarding school at 6, and then it was peer on peer and other kinds of abuse. And that stuff took me 50 years to work out. And I didn't write The Shack until I really felt whole, or at least mostly whole. I can still get triggered, but it takes an awful lot. And the big question that's at the heart of The Shack is, where were you? And I think that's partly why it resonates. It's not a religious book. It's a very human book. And there's no hook. There's no like, oh, this is a secret way to try to get you to convert or something. It's not like that at all. Here's something to think about.
No, it doesn't feel like that.
No, it doesn't feel religious at all. This is why my people, the religious people, are kind of pissed off about it. A lot of them. Yeah. Well, and they're my people. So I tell people. I
know. I totally understand what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Be careful how you talk about them. Those are my people, the ones who are mad at me.
They are.
And, but think about this. God could have chosen not to create at all. And we wouldn't be having this conversation. Right. So that was an option. And he could have chosen to create a universe in which it was just a machine. Everything worked by natural law. And And there is natural law in this world, in our world. Gravity
Sure.
works, and electromagnetism and quantum theory and all that.
Mhm.
The law of consequences, all that kind of stuff, right? Or he could have chosen to make just a machine. Or this would have been really tricky, but he could have done it. God could have done it. God could have made a universe in which it was a big machine, but there was a really sophisticated part of the machine called a human being
Mm.
who thought they had personal agency, what we kind of call free will,
Sure.
but really didn't. It was just, they were convinced that they had the ability to choose, but they actually didn't. They were a very sophisticated part of the machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the only fourth option that I know is this world, the one that we live in. And yes, we have natural law, but we also have personal agency. We can say no to love. Now, of those four possibilities, there's only one universe in which love is even possible. And that's this one.
Yeah.
All the other three, and I don't know of a fifth one. Those are the only four I've ever been able to think that are true.
Right.
So if you don't have the power to say no, then your yes doesn't matter, right? It's of no more significance than your no. It just doesn't matter.
Right.
So here we are. I was talking to somebody today about, the prodigal sons, the two boys and the father.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so why doesn't the father pursue the son who's going to screw his life up, right? Really badly. Why doesn't he pursue him? Is that love? Actually, yes. And he waits, but he's always looking at the horizon, right? But he waits, and it's like, no, you're no actual. And you have to understand, in the Jewish culture, if somebody says, I want my inheritance, which only happened when the parent died, they're saying, you're dead to me. And I want this that's mine, but you're dead to me.
Wow, that's even stronger.
It's way stronger.
Yeah.
And so
the rejection that the father had to go through.
Totally. But he loves his son, and he loves the older brother too, who is more lost than if you think about Jesus, who was able to find him? The broken people, the prostitutes, the marginalized, the poor, the outcasts, which were a lot of the handicapped folks, right? The mentally ill. They had no trouble finding Jesus.
Right.
Who had a hard time. The religious people, the wealthy people. I mean, they had something else that they thought they could trust. So at the end of that story, you still don't know if the older brother, the father pursues him.
Exactly.
Right? And waits for the younger brother. So it's a profound thing. And it's like, if God takes over and stops my dad from harming me or stops the sexual abuse, the whole universe shudders to a standstill, because God just said, no, I'm going to make a decision for a human being and take away that personal agency, right? Therefore, you lose the power to love. You lose the power to forgive somebody or ask for forgiveness or learn how to love yourself. All of that ceases to exist. And it's a hard thing to think about that, but you actually don't want God to make your decisions for you. And God will refuse to make decisions for you. This is about a relationship of love, and it hurts. This is not an easy road, and forgiveness is not easy.
So then my question is, if that is so, then where does prayer come in? And I understand that it's relationship, but if we can never ask God to intervene, are we just always doing what we do and God doesn't intervene in our choices? How does that work?
A lot of us think of prayer as magic, right? It's sort of the Christianese or whatever religion, it's the magic way to twist God's arm.
Right. Like, here's the wand, do this, don't do that.
I know. It's like, if I can just come up with the right abracadabra, I can get the outcome that I want, right? which is not about relationship. That's about power.
Yes.
And a lot of us treat prayer as power. And it's like you said, it's about relationship. Prayer is just a conversation inside a relationship. We just don't know how to tell the truth. Right? We don't say to God, I am really pissed off and I don't think you're big enough for this. What do you think? I believe that every human being has a safe place inside their soul that they've had since they were a child, where they can go. Because where do you think God lives? God doesn't live out there separated from us. God lives in here, inside my mind, inside my imagination, inside my emotional world, and speaks to me. Right? And it, sadly, the religious people took that away from a lot of us. They said, no, we're going to tell you how God is talking to you, right? And as a result,
here's how you get in the club: A, B, C, D. Hop on my side.
Exactly. And it's like, how destructive was that? You know, there's this great little thing that Jesus says. He says, many will say to me on that day, which is the day you have to deal with your shit, right?
Right.
Many will say to me on that day, we prayed, we did miracles in your name. We cast out demons and we, preached the gospel and all that.
We did all the things.
Which it sounds like a bunch of Christians.
Absolutely sounds like that.
And Jesus will say, depart from me into everlasting destruction, because I don't know you. Right? Now that sounds like a threat. But it's actually a promise. It's actually a promise. What is Jesus saying? He's saying, look, I don't build a relationship with someone who doesn't exist, right? You think your church acting, superiority, performance oriented, you think the older brother, you think, well, he doesn't understand. He is more lost than the younger brother. They're both lost, right? So Jesus is saying, I want that false persona to be utterly destroyed. Why? Because then we can actually build a relationship, right? And a lot of times what we learn in religion is how to perform, hopeful that if we can do it right, then we can get the right results. It's a control technique.
Yeah.
And prayer for a lot of people is control rather than conversation inside a relationship.
Ongoing.
And this is the thing about the tragedy and the trauma that we experience. Where was God? Right in the middle of it.
Right.
And if you want to see what that looks like, look at Jesus. God the Father didn't kill Jesus. We did. We turned our face away. We separated ourselves, right? All of that. It's not foretold by the prophets and enacted right inside the Gospels, And it's like, no. It is a crazy thing, but this is the God who is the creator of the universe, who lives inside of you and goes right through the losses with you.
Yeah.
Because this is a God who by nature submits to human personal agency and still works to redeem the broken things and grow things out of the ashes. Right. They say, what's that verse about, out of the ashes, right? That goes through a fire. Well, the ashes are the only thing that makes it through the fire. Right. And yet that's where the life grows, and it's a horror. God doesn't hurt you in order to accomplish good. That will never happen. And if you want to know what God is truly like, you look at Jesus, because he is the exact representation and the image of God in human form. Yeah. If it doesn't look like Jesus, it's not God. Yeah. And so, these are tough questions, and we can climb into someone's personal experience. And I know that you have to deal with this because of being in the kind of environment and culture that you're in, but there's tragic things happening and real acts of non-love, violence, right, inside the culture that you're in.
Absolutely.
But all external violence comes from internal violence. Every expression of external violence comes from internal violence.
Right.
And internal violence always is an expression of a false self. Always. It's at war. You're at war within yourself, right? And so how can you tell a false self? Well, anyone who self-protects and self-promotes, right? Gossip is self-protection or self-promotion, where you feel like you got to be better than someone, right? That's an internally violent thing. And so if you self-promote and self-protect, and you're in a situation where the guards don't have a true identity and the inmates don't have a true identity. And so when you have false identity against false identity, and this person is trying to self-promote and this person is trying to self-protect, you get war.
Very destructive. Yes.
Very destructive. And all false identities originate in fear. And the only thing that defeats
and shame,
fear,
right?
Yeah, fear and shame. Those are the real enemies.
Yes.
You know, guilt is I've done something wrong.
I see it every day.
Yep. And we can tell the truth that we've done something wrong. Shame is I am something wrong.
Right.
And let me tell you, abuse will tell you that you're something wrong. You're a piece of shit. Experience will tell you that. Trauma will tell you that. The person in front of you will tell you that. Out here, social media will tell you that. Culture
Abandonment, rejection.
Abandonment will tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Everything is whispering to you, you're worthless. And then some of our really bad theology camps right in that and says, God thinks the same way about you, you know, that you're a piece of crap.
Right.
And you have a sin nature and all that. And so false selves exist because of fear. I'm not enough. I'm a piece of crap. You know, what do you expect? I'm just acting out what I actually believe is the truth of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
As a person thinks in their heart about the truth of who they are, so becomes the way of their being. Yeah. You will express what you deeply believe about yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, I have to self-protect or I'll get killed. Well, you don't know that.
So I have some questions from these ladies that they would like to ask you. So should we fire away?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, the first one is.
By the way, I'm so totally honored to be a part of this. You have no idea.
Well, I'm equally honored, right back at you, because this is such a treat for me and it will be such a treat for them. So I hope when COVID is over, maybe you can come in person. They would love that.
I would love that.
Great. Okay, this is from Summer Day. What a lovely name, huh?
Perfect.
Summer Day asks, what prompted you to write this story and why that particular sadness?
So in the book, if you've read the book, Mackenzie Allen Phillips, the main character, the initials of his name spell MAP, M-A-P. Melissa Ann Phillips also spells MAP. So Missy and Mackenzie both spell MAP. That is, they overlay. And I wrote this because I'm Mackenzie. You know, what I was trying to do and what Kim, who I'm married to, asked me to do for like 4 years during my 11-year deconstruction and rebuilding process. She said, you know, someday as a gift for our kids, would you just put in one place how you think, because you think outside the box. And I didn't feel healthy enough to do that until I was 50 years old, which was the year after what I considered to be the 11-year dismantling, you know, starting with Kim caught me in a 3-month affair with one of her best friends. And that's what confronted me with the brokenness of my own soul. Right. And I had never let anybody in. I had never said to another human being, can you help me? And at that point, it was either find a way to change or kill myself. Suicide had always been a companion, always given me the last way to run away before I had to actually face stuff. And I made the choice to see if there was a way to change, or I wouldn't be here. And that meant I started with therapy. I finally asked a human being, can you help me? And that started my 11-year journey, where we didn't make my adultery the new secret. And it took Kim and I 11 years to heal. And the 12th year was the year I turned 50. And the 12th year, I finally was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm like one of the healthiest people I know. I don't have any secrets. I don't have any addictions.
Yeah.
I'm not even addicted to the Christian addictions, like doing something great for God or having a ministry or something.
Yes.
And or having a purpose, any of that kind of stuff. I
So
finally felt
free.
like I finally felt like a child. They don't have any of those things, right?
Yes, that's lovely.
And I was 50 years old and finally felt like for the first time in my life that it was, so this is what a child who isn't damaged lives like,
Mhm.
And so Kim had been asking me, like, would you write something? And I thought, what if I wasn't here? What would I have wanted to leave my children, our 6 kids? The youngest was 12 at the time.
Mhm.
And what would I have wanted to say to them? And I wrote this, and I wrote it as a story. We had a 5-year-old niece who was killed the day after her 5th birthday. So it's not like we're separated from that kind of loss.
Right.
But I embedded my own story inside this story.
Mhm.
And if you knew my world and the people, my kids and my family and my extended family, you'd see all kinds of things inside that story. But it didn't matter. It was still relatable to anybody as a human being. The book is a human story.
Mhm.
And it contains all the elements like loss and a desire for vengeance and the issue of forgiveness and this strange possibility of reconciliation, because forgiveness and reconciliation are very different things. Forgiveness is for the sake of the victim.
Right.
For you to forgive someone is not to change them. It's to let go of the power that they have in your life. And frankly, most of them don't care.
Right.
Or dead, right? So if you're waiting for somebody else to change so that you can be free, good luck with that. Let me know how it works, because it never worked for me.
Mhm.
And so forgiveness is for the sake of the victim. It's so that you don't have to carry a corpse around on your back that
Is you,
poisons all your other relationships. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Reconciliation is the rebuilding of trust. And that's hard work. And that takes time.
Mhm.
It requires learning to be a truth teller. And I think most people lie not to deceive people, but to stay safe. I think it's a survival skill.
Mhm.
But you don't want to be a liar in terms of the way of your being. You really have a desire to be authentic and a truth teller, which means you're not going to change because you get such self-discipline that you're going to change. You change because you begin to see that there is an identity. You are a truth teller at the core of your being.
Mhm.
You're made in the image and likeness of God, and God's a truth teller. So that changes everything. But man, that means you have to let go of your survival skills,
Right.
which that is hard work. And you have to learn to trust.
Well, and when you've never felt safe or you've never felt like you can trust, it's
Yeah.
a big leap.
Yeah. And frankly, most of us don't leap there.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
slow,
Because it's hard.
incremental steps. Yeah. And that's why it took me 11 years. It took
Yeah.
me and Kim 11 years to heal
To build back.
until she says, we were in a circle of friends in my 12th year, right? And after the 11 years, and she says in front of me to them who knew my story, because we never made, like I said, we never made the adultery a new secret. She said, I never thought I would ever say this. And Kim's a very powerful, strong human being. She's from North Dakota, where there's no 50 shades of nothing. It's like this or that. It's just,
Right. It is what it is there.
And she and her 5 sisters, she has 5 sisters and 2 brothers, but her and her 5 sisters are called the Force. And may the Force be with you. I tell people I married the wrath of God, and I used to be afraid of the wrath of God, but now I'm not, because I found out the wrath of God is not against me. It's against everything in my life that keeps me from being fully human and fully alive. So we're sitting in a circle, and Kim says, I never thought I would ever say this. It was all worth it. And she is not justifying adultery. There's nothing that justifies adultery. What she is saying is, There is nothing so broken that God can't heal it, and nothing so lost that God doesn't know where it is, and nothing so dead that God can't grow something inside of it. And
What a powerful
beyond,
thing to say, and
oh
what a
my
powerful thing for
gosh,
you to get to hear. So beautiful.
yeah. And
But life
and
is
you know, I
worth
was,
it, even
yeah,
in the midst
it
of the
is.
deepest agony. It is.
Yeah,
All
I
the
was.
stories.
You know who Maria Shriver is, right? Married
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
Arnold.
Yeah.
I did an interview with her for Good Morning America or something, and we went for a walk. And she says to me, she says, "Does Kim trust you?" And I said, "Absolutely." And she has every reason to. And
Mhm.
she's like, "How did you get there?" Because she was terribly betrayed.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I talked to her about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, and the fact that you have to be a truth teller to reconcile, and you have to, which is confession, and then you have to change your mind, and
Right.
then you have to change the way of your life, the choices you make over time. You can't demand reconciliation from anybody. If it happens, it's an absolute miraculous gift.
Right.
You
Yes.
can forgive anybody,
Hmm.
but reconciliation is a hard work.
So my next question comes from Brandy, and it actually has two parts. The
Okay.
first one is, why does God not redirect harm aimed specifically at children who cannot defend themselves? And the
Mm.
next part of that is, God created me. He knows my heart and mind. How can I trust a God who allowed me to be such a monster?
Yeah. Yeah. That goes back to the fact that, we haven't loved well ever since Adam,
Right.
you know, and it's kind of like it's back to something that I already said, in the sense that at what point was God supposed to take away your ability to choose,
Mm-hmm.
to have personal agency?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has free will. All will is coerced in some sense. And, and so I don't like that term, but I do like personal agency. You
Mm-hmm.
have the power to choose in any situation how you respond. Children, that's a tough one, um, because in so many senses they are defenseless, and they don't even know how to develop survival skills without shame. They just don't know how to do it, because they don't have the brain and mental capacity to do that. They're not in. They weren't supposed to do that. They were supposed to be loved well, and they're worth loving well,
Mm-hmm.
and they've always been worth loving well. And we've done such a poor job of it generationally that it takes somebody along the way to push the button on the elevator and says, "I'm getting off at this floor."
Yes.
And that begins to then redeem and change the generations to come. The prophets in the Hebrew scriptures had this beautiful thing about how the brokenness will last 6 or 7 generations, but change and goodness will last 1,000.
Yes.
Right?
Such a
And
beautiful thought.
what that means is that choices for love are way more powerful than choices for damage and brokenness.
Mm-hmm.
And the presence of love is what destroys fear, right? Because there is no fear in love.
Right.
And we already said fear and shame are at the root of so many of these things.
Mm-hmm.
It is an absolute tragedy that we don't love enough to protect the children in our world. But listen, I don't know a human being who wasn't a child. Hurt people hurt people.
Yes, that's right.
They were once a child. It doesn't justify what they did. And they're going to deal with the consuming fire
Well,
of
it
love.
reminds me of the scene in the movie when Wisdom is in the cave and all of a
Yeah.
sudden Matt gets the playback, right? How far do we go? Where do we stop? It's a cycle, it's generational, and you're right. It's
Yeah.
to
They
get
did a
to
really
that
great,
point,
yeah.
it's such a deep
Yeah.
woundedness.
They did a great job in the movie, because
That was a
he is
powerful
seeing this. Oh my gosh.
one of my
He's
favorite things
seeing,
in the film, honestly.
and he's going like, the child is being have the crap beat out of him by his father, and he's going like, it's not his fault, right? And he doesn't realize that's his father.
That's his dad. Yes.
Yeah, that's his, and he doesn't realize that until he's confronted by it. And then it's like, oh my gosh, the whole paradigm falls apart.
Right. Right.
You know, every person who hurt somebody was once a child. And I don't know anybody who hurts that isn't broken themselves. And it's like, how is this going to change? Well, the presence of love, that's how it's going to change.
Right.
And that little incremental choices that I make to become a whole person, that ripples, and I trust the ripples. I've seen it in my own life, and I've seen it in the lives of others. But somebody's got to say, I don't have to hit the bottom floor. I can get off the elevator at any point.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's good. Okay. The next question is from Lexi, and Lexi asks, how can God forgive us if we can't even forgive ourselves? And what is a good first step toward self-forgiveness?
Yeah. God can do it because God is love. We don't know how to love very well. So we don't know how to love ourselves very well, you know.
And it's hard to connect that that's possible because we think about God like he's us.
Right. I mean,
Right?
we
don't
project
have,
our damage on the face of God. Yeah. And Lexi, is such a great question. And I love the name Lexi because we have one in our family. And so a good first step is to start being a truth teller. Take the risk of telling the truth and letting somebody in. The crazy thing about this journey toward wholeness is that you can't heal yourself, right? And loving yourself is not just a decision you make. It happens as you become a more whole person. Your capacity to love anybody grows, and that includes yourself. And some of it means you're going to have to get to the place where you forgive yourself, because there's a child in you that didn't know what to do, right? And is not responsible for the damage that was done. And yeah, it plays out in our lives as expressions of shame and fear. And yeah, we make decisions that we have to embrace the consequences because choice actually matters.
Yeah.
But it doesn't dictate to us the truth of who we are. And sadly, we believed that the truth of who we are was the actions that we did, you know, or what was done to us. You know, if those who should have loved us, my dad, here's a crazy thing. In my relationship with my dad, he's 91 now. And his oldest sister is going to be 101 this year.
Wow.
I talk to her fairly regularly. But my dad, I didn't let him become a human being until his 80th birthday, right?
Yeah.
I always wanted him to be my dad. And I set up a minefield that he didn't know how to navigate.
Right.
And I always ended up disappointed because expectations are just disappointments waiting to happen.
Right.
Should he have been a better father? No doubt. Should I have been? No doubt. You know, I'm a much better grandfather than I was a dad, and my kids are both.
I think that happens a lot.
Well, hopefully we've moved in the direction of some sense of wholeness by the time, you know, there are grandchildren around.
Yeah.
One of the beautiful things is that my relationship with my grandchildren is healing some of the deficits that I perpetrated on my own kids.
For your kids, I'm sure, watching you be a grandparent. Yeah, I bet.
Because I'm loving someone who is made out of them. Yeah.
Yes.
That's another, it's a person who is them in a different form.
Right.
In a sense. And which I didn't see that coming. And it wasn't a plan on my part. It just happened. So yeah, I think that addresses the questions.
That makes sense. I was thinking as you spoke, Lexi was in a class that I teach called problem solving, and she told her story and she hadn't told it. And so I felt really honored that
that's hugely courageous.
That she felt safe enough to tell it. But I think it was a big step for
made
her. And I think
huge step.
Yeah. Totally affected everyone in the room.
Yeah. I have a friend who works with issues of identity, and And he was in a room of 45 like really successful business people. And he said, we're going to take like a minute each, which is 45 minutes. We're going to take a minute each and go around the circle. And I want you to tell us something about yourself. And the first guy says, well, I'm part of a $2 billion company. And we did $2 billion last year in revenue. I'm the, chief operating officer. And for a minute, he tells about all of his successes.
Accomplishments, yeah.
Well, after that, I mean, he totally divided the room, because after that, everybody is trying to justify their existence based on performance, right? So the next person says, oh, and starts self-protecting and self-promoting. Goes all the way around like that. And my friend tells me, I wanted to light into them and say, what the hell are you doing? But he said, I didn't think that would be very beneficial. So
probably not as an intro.
Yeah. So he said, we've spent 45 minutes and I actually don't know anything about you, any of you. Mm-hmm. Right. So he unmasked that whole performance thing. Right. He says, we're going to go around again. And here's what I want you to answer. What is the greatest thing that you're struggling with right now? What is causing you the most pain right now? Wow. And that same guy who was part of the $2 billion company began to cry. And he said, my kids won't talk to me. They won't talk to me, because I've been so busy being successful. And you watch that whole room unite over loss and truth telling, not over posturing and performance.
And the tone changes.
Oh my gosh, the whole, and it was just like a different world. Suddenly we're all human beings together, because we all know loss, right? It's one of the greatest things that we share. And we all know grief, and we know failure, and we know the whispers of being pieces of shit.
Right. And when someone admits it, then it's like all the rest of us can breathe and say, yes, that's why church is so sad sometimes, because people work so hard to keep all their fig leaves in place.
Self-promotion, self-protection, false identity. Yeah. And religious identities are like, they're more lost because they're more socially acceptable.
Right, exactly. Harder to find, harder to get under there. Yeah. Okay, this next question is from Bonnie. Do you believe heaven is as you described it in the movie and the book? What do you suggest for someone who is incarcerated to flourish? Those are kind of unrelated.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't think a lot about post-mortem existence, after the by and by and all that. It's all imagination at this point. I believe in eternal life in the present tense, right? And so that scene, chapter 15, and if you read the book, it's the only chapter that's in the book the way I wrote it the day I wrote it. It's never been touched by a rewrite. And the director and producer of the movie said to me, said, if we tried to do justice to that chapter, it would have cost us an extra $10 million.
Wow.
because that chapter it's real kick-ass in the book. It's really is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is. But it's a representation of life now, real life. And so I don't see like you die and you go somewhere. C.S. Lewis, who's a favorite author of mine, he says, heaven is 2 feet forward and 1 to the left. It's like right here. And Jesus said, this is eternal life, that you know me and the one who sent me, right? That's the reality. We're not waiting for the real life to start once we get through this shitstorm,
Yeah, that happens right here and right now.
It does. And that was a big surprise to me growing up in the church, because everybody was...
Because we're waiting on the mansion.
Well, and death became their salvation. It was like, but you couldn't actually kill yourself because that was a mortal sin. So, it was like, oh man, I hope somebody runs me over, and, then I'll be free. No, this is about being free now.
Yes.
So I however that works out. And I think if you don't deal with your crap now, you're going to deal with it. It's not like you're suddenly going to be just magically changed. You know, the New Testament talks about the fire that burns away wood, hay, and stubble. And it's
Yes.
talking about something post-mortem. What if, you know how hard it is to start letting someone in, or about facing those you've harmed, right?
Mm-hmm.
How hard that is. And about even facing yourself whom you've harmed by decisions to hide and addiction, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What if the postmortem experience is where you've got to face all the stories face to face with those that not only you've harmed, but have harmed you?
Yeah.
And work it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of the mythology about heaven, the mansions and all that kind of stuff, is just ludicrous. You know, we get it from very small pieces of scripture, and then you know, what we did is we painted our existence with our own shame as a way of escaping having to deal with it now. You know, it's like we're just going to escape.
Right.
And it's like, no, you can't escape this. You can't escape dealing with your junk. It's like, no. And so we're going to deal with it. And that's the refiner's fire. You know, to quote MacDonald, I think, who was C.S. Lewis's mentor, he says, "This is not a God who stands idly by while anything that is not of love's kind remains." You know, and so the intention of this fire, which is love, is to destroy all that which keeps you from being fully human and fully alive. Yeah. But God will not heal you apart from your participation.
Right.
And this is through relationship. You know, this is through letting people in, which is also, when I was asked about what's a good first step, there's one. And you were saying Lexi made that, opened up her heart and life. That's so essential and so courageous. You know, she begins to do that and finds out that there are people in this world that you can trust.
Right.
And she can become one of those people.
It's interesting because some of the incarcerated, I mean, they're all different ages, right? Different stories. And Bonnie, who asked that question about suggesting someone who's incarcerated to flourish, she is actually a flourishing incarcerated person, and she's a mom and a role model and lots of fun. Wow. So I found it kind of interesting that she asked, because she's a good model for that, honestly.
Yeah.
But you're right. Letting people in is huge.
Yep. False identities will help you survive, but they can never help you thrive.
Right. She tells us the best jokes in class.
One of the things that was really helpful to me was to begin to realize that God has never ripped my survival skills and coping mechanisms out of my hands, even though they were destructive.
Right.
That is that God waited for me to let go of them, which was so much harder. I wanted God, why don't you just destroy these hyper-vigilant survival mechanisms, right, where I can't trust anybody, you know? And this is why I think a lot of us we're sort of inclined toward religion, because you don't have to actually trust God to be religious, you know? You just have to know what you're supposed to do. And then
which is safer and easier, right? To know the
way easier
than it is,
than actually dealing with your stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So true. Okay, Cynthia asks, do you believe in hell and who goes there?
Oh, great question. And I'll try to make it succinct, because this could be a 2-hour conversation.
Absolutely.
Because when people say, do you believe in hell? Those who are aware of the fundamentalist evangelical Christianity, where I grew up, they're talking about eternal conscious torment, right? This place of burning people forever and ever and ever.
Forever,
and forever and ever, which means that one human being will experience more pain and suffering in an eternal reality than the entire human race has experienced within a temporal reality, within time. Like, I only know 2 people in the world that I'm aware of who actually believed that. I mean, who really believed that. They also believed in something called the age of accountability, which Christians made up because they just couldn't see sending children to hell, right? Eternal conscious torment.
Right.
And so what they did is they said, well, you have till you're 12 years old.
I totally remember that.
Yeah, they made it up. And it's like, why 12? Well, that's because that's when Jesus went to the temple, or they think that Abraham and Isaac's story, that Isaac was 12, which he wasn't. He was like 30. And so, but it was because their own heart said there's something wrong about this. But the two people that I know that actually believed this, the way it was taught by my people, both killed their children before they reached the age of 12. And on the witness stand, their defense was, I would rather spend eternity in hell than allow my children to reach an age where they would lose, they could make a choice that would be such that they would spend eternity in hell. So it was an act of love in their mind.
Wow.
And it's totally consistent if you embrace the presuppositions that there is such a place. Also, I love this. Religious people believe in hell, and spiritual people have been there, right? So here's the deal. Hell is either uncreated or created. If it's uncreated, it is God, because God is the only uncreated. If it's a created thing, listen to this verse from Romans. Nothing can separate you from the love of God, not death or life, not anything present nor anything future, right? Not hell, right? None of these things can separate you from the love of God. Here's my view. Both heaven and hell are relationships to love. So if you're saying no to love, you will experience the consequences of those choices, not as punishments, but as reality, right? Because you will continue to inflict damage on yourself and the people around you. You will continue to harm because you're saying no to love. It is part of personal agency. It's part of how incredible a human being actually is. So if you say yes to it, to love, then there will be still a process of burning away all the garbage, all your survival skills in this relationship with God, who is a consuming fire. But it's a fire that is for you to free you. So saying no, turning your face away from love, is to experience hell. And so I don't see it as and I see it as metaphorical in terms of the scriptures themselves. And I don't, if it was so important, the book of Acts, which is all the first sermons or all the first teachings of the early church, you'd find it everywhere, not mentioned one time.
Right.
Not once.
That's pretty significant.
It's really significant. So why do people have this doctrine? That's because we thought we were better than somebody, and we wanted them to go to someplace, right?
Yeah.
But it's based on the illusion of separation. And it's like, no, the illusion is that I don't know who I am. If I knew the truth of who I was, I would begin to act that way, because it's the truth of who I am as a child of God, made in the image of God, indwelt by the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I don't know a human being. And the early church was really good about this. They said, if Jesus doesn't live in you, you will lapse into non-being. Because everything that was created, nothing was created apart from him.
Right.
And everything was created in him, now is for him, by him, is sustained in him, right? Whether you like it or not, Jesus lives in you. And that's part of the conflict that you feel. And you're created in the image of God. So you actually want to be a truth teller, deeper than all these survival skills that cause you to be a non-truth teller.
So good. Okay, this is from Trina, and she is asking, how did you come to understand the Trinity in that way?
Yeah, so part of it, that was one of the good things from my heritage. I mean, they talked about the Trinity, but they didn't understand it very well, as if anybody can actually understand it
Mhm.
very well. What I did in the book, and then it shows it in the movie, is that I I I drew a picture of relationship based on three persons who are in complete oneness, which is how the early church looked at it. It
Right.
took the early church like 500 years to come up with a really great word. It's called perichoresis, which is a Greek word.
Mhm.
And it basically means the mutual interpenetration of one with the other without the loss of personhood. Right? How beautiful is that? And it's the only thing that's made any sense to me. And I walked on the edges of all kinds of other religions and philosophies and things like that. And fundamentally nothing made any sense to me, except if you have God who is a singularity, like alone, if God has ever been alone, then love can't. This is why in Islam, God is not love. God is merciful, but not love.
Mhm.
And legitimately so, because they believe God is alone and one. And their point is, if God loves, because love requires an other, and if God, in order to be
Relationship.
love, needs an other, then the other that God needs is greater than God. So it's blasphemy. So one doesn't work. And
Right.
in the Hebrew scriptures, Elohim, which is the first name for God, it's actually not just plural. It's just not two, it's three or more.
Mm.
And so it's built right into the language structure. And so two is beautiful. You know, I love you, you love me. But three means that I love the one you love, right?
Mm.
So three becomes, and three is just woven into the fabric of this cosmos.
Mhm.
But it also means that relationship is the very nature of God.
Mhm.
If God has, that's, you know what this means? For one, it means a lot of things, but for one of them, none of us have ever been alone, because God has never been alone. Aloneness is actually contrary to the nature of God, and it is contrary to the nature of being human.
Mhm.
And that fundamental sense that I'm alone or I'm separated from God because I've screwed up my life or all that, it's a lie. It's not true,
Right.
because the very nature of God is that God has never been alone. And you're made in the image of a God who's never been alone. Plus, you don't exist unless God is in you. Therefore, you've never been alone. It feels like it, but that's part of the delusion and the illusion of separation.
How
And so,
healing to get a hold of that truth.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's not new. This has been taught for centuries, except in the West, in the last few hundred years, we got into kind of a legal model of relationship with God, and it sort of screwed a lot of things up.
What about the
But
gender issues of the Trinity? Did you ever get any pushback from that?
actually, no.
Hmm.
And you know, well, except from my own people. Let me rephrase that. They didn't much like that God the Father was a black woman, right? That
I
that
loved
but
it right
I did
away.
too. I did too. And that's because in scripture, God is not male or female,
No, that's right.
right? And here's a beautiful thing. The word Holy Spirit in the Hebrew scriptures is feminine, ruach. It's
Yes, I
feminine.
knew that.
Yeah, and God is referred to as the breasted one. And there are very feminine language with regard
So
to
many
God.
references. Yeah.
So, you know, I, I think that, well, almost all the nouns for God in the Hebrew scriptures are masculine, but almost all the verbs for God are feminine.
Interesting.
So interesting.
Yeah.
So what I was doing, remember, I'm writing this for my kids. So I don't want, I'm not excited for them to fall into the traditional hierarchical, you
Sure.
know, white male God thing.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, the nature and character of God embraces the entire gamut of our experience to be human, which is the masculine feminine gamut, right? And to picture God in feminine form, there's this passage. Let me grab it because it's really cool. Um, I'm hooked. So hold on a second.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm reaching.
Get what you need.
Yep, I got it. I got it. Okay. This I love. And it's in the prophets. Like, I mean, and there's no way around it. You have to remember that that there was a passage, or when the Hebrew was translated, it was first translated into Greek. It's called the LXX. Later, that Greek text was translated into Latin, right? And
Wow.
so the Latin, the Greek text was the one that most of the people in the New Testament actually
We're
used.
familiar with. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And their quotes are from the Greek text, but the Latin then took the Greek text and that became what's called the Vulgate. But we have so much English that is connected to Latin words, right? Especially when you're dealing with medicine and things
Sure,
like
yeah.
that. So listen to this, and I'm going to read it to you in English, and then I'm going to read it to you with certain words in the Latin. And so this is it. Listen to me, O house of Jacob, all the remnant of the house of Israel, you who have been born, which is carried, B-O-R-N-E, right? Carried by me from birth and have been carried from the womb. Even to your old age, I will be the same. Even to your graying years, I will bear you. I've done it. I will carry you. I will bear you, and I will deliver you. All right. So here's the Latin. I'll use the English, but then I'm going to insert the actual Vulgate Latin words. Listen to me, O house of Jacob, all the remnant of the house of Israel, you who have been carried meo utero.
Wow.
Right? By me from birth and have been carried from meo vulva.
Oh my word.
Yes, by my uterus and vulva, right?
Amazing.
Which are the feminine, the
about as
female
feminine
body
as
parts.
you can get. Yes.
Yeah. Even to your graying years, I will bear you, right?
Yeah.
And I have done it. I will carry you and I will bear you and then I'll deliver you, right? Even to your graying years. And it's all this absolutely female language.
Yeah. I love
It's like,
that.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So, you know, Jesus, I got to play him as Jesus, like he's like a Jew. And even in the movie, we think it's one of the first times that Jesus has ever been played by an actual Jew, you know, and he was sweet. Aviva Lush from Tel Aviv. And, but again, you know, Jesus was never a Christian, thankfully. He was a Jewish Palestinian.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Ariel's question. Do you still question God?
I not so much question God because I've become very comfortable with the goodness of God. But I question human things a lot and involve God and I guess I do question God, or I ask God lots of questions. Put it that way. There's a difference between questioning
That's different.
God
Yeah.
and asking God questions. So one of my favorite questions for quite a while has been, are you worried about this?
Yeah, I can imagine. That's a good question.
It's a great question. It's like, I've never heard God say, well, yeah, I mean, we were caught off guard by this and we just don't know what to do. You got any suggestions? I've never heard that. I always hear laugh, no. And it's like, oh, good. Well, then I have to make a decision whether to be worried about it on behalf of God or not. You know, if he won't be worried, somebody's got to be worried. And so I do ask lots of questions because there's a lot of things that I don't understand. And sometimes, you know, I talk about in my imagination, going to that place and meeting with Jesus or the Holy Spirit or the three of them or God, Papa God, or, you know, and they can, interesting thing, you know, some of the women that we have related to who have been trafficked, right? Terribly abused. When they go to that safe place inside of them, many of them, you know how God has come to them as a big black Labrador retriever.
Wow.
Because men have so abused them and women have so betrayed them.
Right.
Right.
That there isn't even a human that they can trust.
Exactly right.
Wow.
And so God meets with them as a black Labrador retriever.
Amazing. Yeah.
I know. So, and that's how it initially begins. God will always find a bridge point that is accessible to you,
Mhm.
and then begin to build a width to your own wholeness process,
Beautiful.
right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question,
Okay.
and this is from Mac.
Mm,
And I know that's a name that's close to your heart.
very close, and she already is. And Mac, I am so sad with you.
Yeah. How can God be good when bad things keep happening?
It's because God is love, and we don't know how to function in love,
Yeah.
right? And it goes back to saying, as much as you would like it, there's something deeper in you that would not like it if God stopped people from doing destructive, unloving things,
Mhm.
right? And so this is a God who suffers in us, with us,
Right
as
there.
us,
Mhm.
right? And and embraces it. Uh, and that's what a central part of the story of Jesus is. This is not a God. We have these imaginations, religious ones, in which God the Father can't look on sin, and that comes out of a half a verse in Habakkuk.
Mhm.
And the other half is really startling. The first half says, God, you are so beautiful, you are so holy, you are so pure that you can't look on sin. The second half says, so why do you? Right?
Wow.
So why do you?
And that's the part
It's
no one
like,
reads.
no. So we in Psalm 22, describing how Jesus would enter into the depth of our illusions in order to destroy the power of death. That starts with, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
Which was the cry of the human heart. Right? This is Mac's question. And halfway through that psalm, it says, which is called the Psalm of the Cross, right? Because that's not Jesus pretending to be human. That's him going into our illusion and delusion of separation, right? You remember in the garden where he's saying, is there any way this cup can pass from me? He's not talking about being crucified. Hundreds of people were being crucified every day, right? He's not talking about just the torture of crucifixion, which was horrific enough.
Right.
But this is Jesus who is going to experience separation for the first time in existence. He is going to enter into the illusion that he's alone. And that's almost unbearable, an imagination or thought.
Yeah.
But unless he goes there, he's not going to destroy separation and the illusion of it, right? And so he quotes from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Halfway through, it says this, but you do not despise the affliction, the brokenness, the damage, the abuse of the one who's afflicted, nor will you turn your face from him. And when he cries, you'll hear. And that psalm ends with the words, and he completed it or finished it.
Wow.
Jesus would never have been able to say, into your hands I commit my spirit, if he thought that he'd been abandoned.
If he wasn't with him. Yeah.
If he knows better, but it feels like separation. It feels like aloneness. It feels like abandonment. And it does for us. Remember in the movie, and they did this so
That
beautifully.
scene where the nail scars, is that what you're
Yeah,
going to
that's
say?
one of them, but that's not the one I'm talking about. The one I'm talking about is very subtle. And it's at the place where Mac and Jesus have already walked on the water and stuff. And Mac's starting to ask all kinds of questions, right? And it's like, now what? And he's started to turn. He's starting to begin to trust at least Jesus, right?
Right.
And Jesus, they're looking at the steps going up into the mountains. And Jesus says, I want you to take the steps. And when you get to the end, keep going. Because that's going to be the cave scene, which is a real massive confrontation.
Right.
Right. And in the movie, he starts up the steps and he stops. And he says, you're not coming? And Jesus says, It's just like, mm-mm. And Mackenzie goes, I thought you said you'd never leave me or forsake me.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus says, and I meant it. Right? It's so beautiful to me because there are times in our experience we don't sense the presence of Jesus or God the Father or the Holy Spirit. We just feel like we're alone. And that's a place where we can begin. It's a necessary part of movement toward wholeness, is that we don't need to feel the presence of God to trust the presence of God.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
That's
And so
wonderful.
that's where Mackenzie is at that point. That, okay, I don't need to feel your presence to trust it,
Mm-hmm.
because you said you'd never leave me or forsake me. And
That's
Jesus like,
good.
and I meant it. I'm
Yeah.
not. But you're not going to, during this part of it, you're not going to sense my presence.
Right.
And that's the big conflict with Sophia and the wisdom of God, right?
It doesn't mean
Over, correct.
yeah.
There
That's
is no
beautiful.
time in which you are separated or alone.
So good.
Mm.
Paul, this was beautiful and powerful and holy ground. Thank you. Thank you
Well,
so
the stories, each of these women and you yourself, our stories are holy ground. Every human being is a story. And so when you share story, you get an invitation to walk on the holy ground of other people's stories.
yeah, I do. I feel like I'm on holy ground every day.
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
some of it is like, oh my gosh, I see the fire of God burning away crap.
Mhm.
And that's the thing about Moses seeing the burning bush, yeah? The thing
Mhm.
about that bush is that anything living wasn't burned. It only burned the things that weren't alive.
Right.
And it's still painful. Fire is fire,
Yeah.
and when we go through the refiner's fire and the purification journey, it hurts like hell.
Yes,
Right?
that's right. That's
To
good.
bring that full circle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well,
thank you.
so grateful. Thank you. It was a privilege, and I hope we can do it in person sometime.
I would like that. I went to Coffee Creek and it was totally against the rules, but the guards let me I hugged people. I hugged the women there. And there's something that's, because touch for me was so detrimental growing up and so damaging growing up.
Mhm.
And they knew I was safe after
Right.
all this time, and touch can be such a sacrament.
Touch is
Um,
healing.
oh my
Not to
gosh.
be able to touch each other or people
Yep.
it's harder to heal. It takes longer to heal when you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah. And sometimes the touch that turns violent is because there is such a longing for touch that is real, but such an inability to cross that barrier, to take the risk, right?
Exactly.
And so you've got to just try to annihilate touch as anything that has any validity to it. And I know, but that comes out of a deep sense of self-brokenness.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, my friend. And
You're welcome.
such a privilege, and look
I feel the
forward
same way.
to
Two-way
all that
street.
God has. Yeah, it was lovely. Take care.
Lovely. You bet. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.